Thank you very much, Ladislav. I would like to connect and reconnect with the previous presentation because the last slide you showed, Monica, was saying reconnecting with nature, and I've called my presentation Reconnecting with Wild Nature. And I think this illustrates what I'm going to talk about. This is a beautiful bird. You can see also not far from Salamanca. This is a displaying great bustard, one of the beautiful birds that we still have in Europe. What I would like to talk about in my presentation is to show you what is happening in Europe. We heard a few things this morning, and I would like to take you with me and explain why we believe there is a historic opportunity in Europe, which led to the initiative I'm going to explain to you, which is Rewilding Europe, which was started 2-3 years ago by a number of individuals who worked in a number of organizations, of which you see the logos here. That's the Wild Wonders of Europe. You will hear more of them this week. WWF Netherlands, Ark Nature, which is a Dutch pioneering rewilding organization, I would say, and also Conservation Capital, which is a UK-based company that is specialized in finance, in banking, in investment, and the like, and business development. Okay, so we saw some very nice old footage from the Swiss National Park, and this is another picture from Switzerland. And it's just very hard to realize that in the history of Europe, only recently, we had this huge population growth. People were immigrating to America, to Australia, but also within Europe, people start to live in areas and use them in a very heavy way, very intense way. This is a picture of the Alps where there is apparently there is a kind of a trade in cattle. So there was a lot of expansion of people. And these are exactly these are exactly areas that are now being abandoned. We heard about land abandonment this morning. And these are areas where those days, marginal areas where you could earn a living, but areas where it's now very hard to survive and to compete with modern agriculture. And those are the areas that are being abandoned, as we heard a few times this morning. And what happens is, and this is actually a picture from a village very nearby, young people are leaving, old generations stay behind, and a lot of the culture of these areas is disappearing. So that's indeed a socio-economic tragedy. And a study that has been commissioned by WWF in 2010 to the Institute for European Environmental Policy, where the scientists looked at, what are the possible scenarios in Europe, and they did a lot of different computer modeling, and they combined them. And the rough figure that we can expect, on top of what has already been abandoned in Europe, is that there will be another 12 to 18 million hectares of land being abandoned in Europe until 2030. So that's huge, and we're talking big surfaces of certain countries in Europe. And in terms of biodiversity, it actually has two phases. On the left side, you can see an area that has been managed in the traditional way, a traditional agricultural way. And because of the decrease of people in that area, the very low densities of natural grazers that survived in these landscapes, but also because of the huge decrease of livestock grazing, these areas actually become young forest. And a lot of the species that are connected to everything between sort of very open landscapes and the close canopy forest are disappearing out of these landscapes. And on the other hand, the very intensified agricultural lands, like on the right side, and like in my country, and we heard Johan speaking this morning about the skylark, in these landscapes, which are actually ecological deserts, even a common species like the skylark can't survive. And then the question is, if you look at where do the species come from in Europe, all the species we have now, we had them already just after the Pleistocene. So those were species that had their evolution in natural landscapes. And we believe that at least half of Europe's biodiversity, from the butterflies and insects to small mammals and the bigger species like this long-legged buzzards, who's taking a lizard to the nest, are depending on some kind of open landscape. So if our landscape becomes young, dense forest because of the changes I explained, then there's a lot of biodiversity threatened because of this process. We heard about wildlife comeback, very spectacular for a number of species against the background of a still decreasing biodiversity, but it shows that if we allow it and if we work for it, wildlife can come back. So that is a very positive development. And because people are living more and more in urban areas, 4 out of 5 Europeans in 2015, there is also an increasing demand to go out and to do a wilderness trail, to see wild animals, to experience nature and to breathe good air. And we see there is an increasing demand in Europe for seeing wildlife and have wilderness experience. And that's not only a wilderness. This is a picture of Berlin where there's like 4,000 wild boars in the city. And the positive emotion of people seeing wildlife at close range is something that is extremely strong, and I think we should make much more use of when we are supporting comeback of wildlife or supporting wilderness or rewilding in Europe. We heard this morning about improved, I think, political situation, starting with the wilderness conference that was held in Prague, a wilderness resolution, and allowing, in the EU Parliament adopted, allowing for bringing back wilderness, bringing back wild areas, bringing back wildlife in Europe. I think that is very positive. And Natura 2000 has been mentioned a number of times, unique in the world, but another study showed, also from the same institute, that only between 9 and 19% of Natura 2000 is being covered in terms of financially, with an estimated yearly budget of nearly 6 billion euro. So that's huge. And that report concludes that business as usual would put this network at risk, actually. And then the question is, and it was mentioned already this morning, maybe there are ways to do this, to manage our Natura 2000 areas more cost effectively. And bringing this all together, all these opportunities and challenges, actually was the base for starting Rewilding Europe. And we started, of course, at what would be then our vision. And that vision is making Europe a wilder place, where there's much more space for wildlife, wilderness, and natural processes, bringing back the variety of life for people to enjoy, to have that close encounter with our animals in Europe, our wild animals, but also to see how this could provide alternatives for people in those areas to earn a living in terms of jobs and income. So this was presented, our vision was presented actually by Johan, who spoke this morning from WWF Netherlands, at the wilderness conference that was held in Prague, where Ladislav was referring to. And we didn't say, okay, we have this great vision and it should happen here and there and there. We actually asked people, if you think this could be interesting for your area, please come to us and nominate your area. So we turned it around and we made it a demand-driven initiative. And we got 30 nominations from all over Europe. That was very encouraging, of course. And out of those 30, we have started to work in 5 areas. We recently added a 6th one, and I will go through them with you in a minute. But we are also exploring another 4 areas, and here you see 3 yellow dots. Those are the 3 areas that have just gone through the scoping phase, and which we're now going to start up. I don't have pictures of those, but I will tell you this is the Eastern Rhodopes, the Thracian Mountains in Bulgaria, so in the far southeast here. It's the Odra Delta, Stettiner Half, on the border between Poland and Germany, and it's Greater Laponia up in Sweden. Let me just take you very quickly to these incredible landscapes and areas where we started working already. This could be Africa. I've seen some African colleagues here. This looks like the European savanna. This is actually the Dehesa in Spain, or the Montado landscape in Portugal. An area, Western Iberia, where there is an excursion on Monday, where people can actually see and look what has started there. Then there is the Danube Delta, where we are working not in the wet parts actually, but in the dry parts of the delta. There is the Eastern Carpathians on the border between Slovakia, Poland and Ukraine, where there's already a lot of the iconic wildlife species, but where the business model and the development of this area creates great opportunities for becoming one of Europe's best wilderness areas. There's the Southern Carpathians. It's just the southern tip of this wildest mountain range we have in Europe, in Romania. There is Velebit, which is on the coast in Croatia, on the Adriatic coast. And there is the Central Apennines, where we've started recently in Italy, just 1.5 hours drive from Rome. So these are our areas where we started. But if you look at rewilding, it's actually happening already for 20 years in Europe in lots of other places. And I just made a small collection here of areas in different European countries where people have been working with these ideas, be it reintroductions, be it different ways of management of areas, be it linking businesses with wild nature, and that's very encouraging. And we would like to create this movement in Europe of rewilding, which where all these people are and projects, initiatives are connected, and where people share lessons and learn from each other. And this is why we started, and it actually will be launched this week here in Salamanca, the European Rewilding Network, where people will be connected and learn from each other on a lot of the challenges and experiences and lessons we have in our rewilding efforts all across Europe. So, that's a nice vision, that's a nice idea, but how would that then actually work in practice? And I think what is rather unique in our approach that we have a very strong connection and integration of new thinking about how to do conservation. We call that rewilding, lots of new innovative ideas. We believe we should pioneer next to lots of good things we're doing already, all of us in Europe. It's about a very strong communication effort from the local people in the areas up to the EU. And also there is the third component, which is the enterprise component, because if we believe that we can move away from marginal subsidized agriculture with a very hard future towards more a wildlife-based economy, then I think we should also help and support setting up these businesses that can actually show how that can be done. So our overall objective is that we have set ourselves, we will try to see if we can rewild an area of at least 1 million hectares in 10 years' time. That's our sort of higher ambition there. And we would like to do that in 10 of those, or 10 of the areas, and you saw the areas on the maps, where not people are cutting and mowing and burning and shooting and managing, but where wild nature shapes the landscape. And that is, I think, a very important paradigm shift we need. Rewilding starts in your mind, I believe. And because the natural process we are talking about are the processes we have been fighting for centuries. We don't like fires, we don't like flooding, we don't like bark beetles, and we don't like other harsh and processes that actually have been shaping European nature. And now saying, okay, we would like to have some of these processes back again and see how we can work with it, especially in the larger areas, whether we give them space and we step back, like the people in Switzerland did in the Swiss National Park. That's a real change for Europeans who have always grown up in a cultivated landscape and think if we don't manage it, it will go wrong. And so this is, I think, a very important element in our rewilding approach, that change of mindset. And of course, as we have seen, a lot of the species got lost and we need to bring them back. And the European bison, one of the keystone species in Europe, a lot of people even don't know that we have bison in Europe. This species is more rare than the black rhino in Africa. We only have 3,000 in the wild, but this is one of the keystone species that roamed all over Europe. And what is also very important is that our wildlife numbers are far too low, and I think Monica has expressed it. Although there is a comeback, a lot of the wild herbivores in particular are at very low levels for different reasons. And what is interesting, I think, of the rewilding approach, it can be applied in all kinds of landscapes. You can start in your garden and you can rewild cities, but you can also do it in some of the finest national parks we have in Europe, as has been shown by the Swiss National Park. Communication is a key element where we started working with the Wild Wonders of Europe, and we are trying to reach out to at least half of the European population, so more than 350 million people, to talk about this, to talk about and show the natural heritage of Europe, but also how we can have more of it. And the outdoor exhibitions that are taking place in a lot of the capitals in Europe are a very good instrument to reach out to huge audiences. Like now in Stockholm, there is still the Wild Wonders of Europe exhibition running, where hundreds of thousands of people are seeing these amazing pictures of what Europe has to offer. There's a huge media coverage already we had as Rewilding Europe, from Geo magazine, which produced articles in all their editions, National Geographic, lots of national magazines and newspapers and media. And like what you see here on the right side here is Rafael Nadal, who opened the Wild Wonders exhibition in Madrid. Another way of connecting also other groups of people apart from our conservation colleagues, to the story. Then the third element, the enterprise side. The question here is, how can rewilding generate income, but also how can investments promote rewilding? And this is where we teamed up with Conservation Capital, which has huge experience in different parts of the world, in particular Africa, how to link enterprise with conservation or rewilding. And that the link mainly in financial and also in legal terms. And we make a distinction between two types of enterprises, very roughly. Enterprises that generate direct outputs, income, for instance, from a lodge, from a wildlife breeding center, from wildlife watching businesses, but also indirect outputs. You know, there are a lot of local products where Europe is famous about, from honey to cheese and wine and olive oil, you name it. And these are the local products that were produced by people in those landscapes where I talked about. And connecting those products with these initiatives could actually provide a new future for these. So these are also businesses we are linking with our rewilding initiatives. And what actually we are looking at, what we would try to achieve is create destinations where local entrepreneurs don't do their own thing, but actually work together and create a product, a destination where you can go. And actually the Faya Brava and Campanarios area here in Western Iberia is already such an example where you can stay in a beautiful local bed and breakfast, where you can go out and camp in nature, where you can have a nice bush dinner, where you can see beautiful wildlife and do trails, and also have the great local food. So that is what we would like to develop as Rewilding Europe in and around our rewilding areas. Wildlife watching is a high priority. It's compared to the United States, compared to Africa, at very early stages, but it's starting. And we believe wildlife watching is a huge opportunity in Europe, which is unlocked. And because we believe that, you know, meeting wildlife, meeting a bear in the wild or wolf in the wild, you don't need to go to Canada, North America. You can do it in Europe. We have 17,000 bears, but there's no product. You can't book it and you can't go there, and you don't have a kind of insurance that you actually can see it. And we say a live animal, a live wolf, a live bear is much more worth than a dead one. And this is what you can see in other parts of the world. So these are some of the species we are talking about here, especially the larger species, of course, which are most attractive. And we actually made an inventory recently about where is this now, this wildlife tourism in Europe, and how promising is it? And we'll go into more detail, look at the economics of it. But what we've done as a first sort of trial is to look at, so where are the tour operators here in green that provide wildlife tourism in Europe? And we're actually quite astonished. There's a lot on offer already, and in red you see where you can go. And so these are places where tour operators provide you with the possibility to go out and not just for a hike, but to actually see animals and have this wilderness experience. So that is already very encouraging, and this is something we would really like to support in the rewilding areas and in general in Europe. We talked about wildlife a lot, and sometimes when I go to one of our beautiful national parks or beautiful wild areas in Europe, I sometimes feel like I'm going to a great theater, but there's no actors. And who would like to go to a theater without actors? You could ask yourself that question. What I'm trying to say is that, again, the natural numbers of wildlife in Europe are still the numbers are still at very low levels. There is no single place in Europe where we have a complete system of carnivores or herbivores or scavengers living in a natural system where natural processes are shaping that area, landscape. We're still managing it, and there's still elements missing, as Monica also pointed out. And I really think there is an opportunity now to start developing and working on some of these areas in Europe, but we need a wildlife comeback. And that is not only for providing opportunities for people, of course, it's also, or to a large extent, for restoring the functioning of our ecosystems. Tropical cascading, the role of grazers, the role of carnivores and scavengers in our systems is something that is not functioning as we would like to have. Cooperations with hunters is essential. A number of the wildlife comeback species have come back because of changing hunting regimes. And so as Rewilding Europe, we're not hunters, but we believe if hunting is part of the problem, it's also part of the solution. And so we are working and trying to work with local hunters to create, for instance, no-take zones where wildlife can come back, become less shy, where you can actually start wildlife watching. And I think this is essential, and we found very positive response from local hunting associations and concessionaires in some of our areas. So, just to summarize for you, the key messages for my presentation, and that's the only slide without a picture. Yes, we have a continued massive land abandonment in Europe still happening. You can dispute how much and how severe, but it's still going on. That creates severe socioeconomic impacts in our rural areas. It's a tragedy. We also see a wildlife comeback, not from all the species, but at least a number of them, against the background of general biodiversity loss. There are really financial challenges in Natura 2000 funding. A lot of areas are heavily depending on subsidies in a financial crisis, and we have too few wildlife to become an economic factor. So, how can we turn these problems into opportunities? Yes, we can turn former cultivated land into new wild areas, connected with existing protected areas, so that we create larger landscapes and networks. We can reintroduce natural processes, completing and boosting our wildlife. We have seen that, it works in practice. That then could lead to wild areas with rich wildlife that start generating their own income and create new rural economies in those areas. And as such, rewilding, next to lots of other conservation tools we have, becomes relevant for protecting and securing Europe's biodiversity. And not in the least, we need to connect with the large audiences in Europe, especially becoming more urban and urban, as we've seen, with our wildlife and our wild areas. So, I would like to invite everybody to work with us to make Europe a wilder place, all strands of society. We think there is a huge opportunity, as I said in the beginning, to make this happen. And I would like to thank our supporters and funders. And I also would like to invite you to our Rewilding Europe seminar, which is on the 9th of October, so next Wednesday, full day seminar, where we go into a lot more detail on the issues I just touched on in my presentation. Thank you very much.